Hi, I'm Brent Stafford, and this is RegWatch by RegulatorWatch.com. The Canadian vaping industry heads into the Christmas holiday on a knife edge, following a flurry of newly announced rules and restrictions that are intended to stem the rise of youth use of vaping products, and upon learning that of the 1,000 specialty vape stores inspected by Health Canada during the past 6 months, more than 80% were found to be selling and promoting products that were in violation of the Tobacco and Vaping Products Act. Major contraventions found by Health Canada include the promotion of vaping products through testimonials or endorsements, and the promotion of flavors that are appealing to youth. All told, the number of infractions is mind-blowing. In just 6 months, Health Canada seized over 80,000 units of non-compliant vaping product from specialty vape stores across the country. Now, this is during the same time the industry was fighting to free itself from accusations that it targets youth and that vaping kills. Failure to comply with the legislation that made vaping legal is more than a black eye for the industry. It could prove devastating to relationships with the regulator, politicians, and the public. Joining us today to talk about all these issues is Daryl Tempest, Executive Director and Chief Advocate from the Canadian Vaping Association. Daryl, thanks for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having me, Brent.
Well, and I wish it was for better news, that's for sure. And we're going to have you explain to our viewers in just a minute and for the rest of the show just how big of a mess this is for the Canadian vaping industry and what steps could be taken to mitigate some of this. But first, there was more bad news for vaping on Thursday. And let me just go over to that. It was new proposed vaping rules and restrictions, and these were put out by Minister of Health Patty Hajdu, and they announced, and sorry, I've got a beeping here. There we go, and 1 second. Okay, well, we'll see. Can you hear that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is batteries going. That's my USB. We're good now. So Health Minister Patty Hajdu announced that the federal government plans to ban the promotion of advertising for nicotine vaping products in spaces where young people can see them, which would include convenience stores, public transit, and all social media platforms. Minister Hajdu also announced requirements that vaping packages would feature health warnings and be child resistant. As well, there are plans to place limits on nicotine content in vaping liquids, and this would be a nicotine cap, presumably intended to lower the potential for youth to become addicted to nicotine. So, Daryl, based on these moves by the federal government and warnings that there could be more action to come, and certainly, too, as well, the national broadcaster, the CBC, has been leading a media war against vaping, it sure looks like the narrative that's being constructed and advanced here is that vaping is a failed experiment in harm reduction. Do you get that sense?
I do get that sense that that narrative is being pushed, specifically in the media. But you've asked some phenomenal questions there in your preamble, and I'd like to address each one in particular, in the same particular order. First, that the announcements from the minister we don't view as bad news at all. We see this as a step in the right direction. So as you know, Brent, or you may have heard, both Sam Tam, the president of the CVA, and myself have did a national tour from October to December, talking not only to industry stakeholders and to business owners, but also to governments. And the concern about the advertising that we've seen in many of the largest provinces across this country have been disturbing to all. They've been disturbing for parents, for Canadians, for regulators, for media, and it got off of this idea where, as an industry, we really talk about harm reduction a lot, and what people were seeing out in the public was things like Perfect Puff and Click and Vape, and these kind of marketing and branding activities, as opposed to what the vaping industry in Canada has always been about, which is harm reduction, right? So you weren't seeing a lot of the signs about, far less harmful, or conversion for harm reduction for your health as an adult Canadian smoker. So that really set the industry back in the eyes of a cohort that we don't talk about a lot. So we talk a lot about smokers as an industry. We talk a lot about vapors, but we don't talk a lot about the 80+% of the nation that do neither. And that's who saw a lot of this advertising. In March of 2019, in response to the Minister of the Day, we put forth a submission calling for a complete ban on advertising from in spaces that were not adult verified. When the industry was thriving and growing through 2014, 2015, 2016, we did not have this. And that was the first narrative that when we talk to governments about we are a harm reduction industry, that was where we got the first amount of pushback, is that those types of messages had nothing to do with harm reduction. So it really resonated with us, and it was consistent not only at a federal level, but with almost every province that we talked to across the country. So this is not only a step in the right direction from the federal government, because it was seen as lack of action from the federal government that led to what we're seeing now, which is different provinces designing different legislation and regulation that they think will address youth uptake. The second is when it comes to nicotine, nicotine concentration levels, again from the federal government, this is not new. They started socializing that they were looking at nicotine levels back in February of 2019, right? And what the concern here is, and as we found from the youth uptake, we started looking at a lot of the preconditions to youth uptake. What is actually attracting youth? And we heard a lot about the heady effect. And so that's that nicotine buzz that you get from high nicotine levels. And we would see it in social media, like Instagram. And the one that went around, I think, Brent, that you and I talked about in the last show, was the young person with the Tim Hortons cup and the 4 pod systems in the cup, and they sucked it up. And that image is the image that almost every politician has in terms of what youth uptake is. That one went like wildfire. And so that is the initial drive into a vaping platform. But if you're going to vape as a young person or even someone above the age of majority, that's going to lead you to a nicotine addiction. And so again, if we are really driving this narrative, which we 100% believe in, which is we're a harm reduction tool for adult Canadian smokers and only for adult Canadian smokers, these are the types of images that we have to address, and that it's that's going to lead to the addiction of the next generation of Canadians. So that the conversation has been that flavors are not the driver of nicotine addiction or youth uptake.
So let me jump in here for a second. So got that. Advertising, I think there's a chunk, obviously, of the industry that, has issues with regards to the banning of advertising. RegWatch has even voiced our issues that we've got as cautions around that. But, it seems that that's okay, fair enough. Look, the way that we've been describing this is that vaping has been forced into a devil's bargain. And so the industry has been fractured on many lines, big issues. Advertising was one of them. Access is the other, where should products be accessed? Should products be accessed at all outside of the adult, vape store only, adult only shops, and so forth. So, we could talk nicotine caps and stuff, but I really want to make sure that we jump right into, and from there we can spill out into the other issues, is that we have 80,000 products that have been seized by Canadian specialty retailers in Canada in the last 6 months, in contravention of the TVPA. And from what I understand, Health Canada is incensed, at a time when they're getting absolutely raked by the CBC, the national broadcaster, the Globe and Mail, every single other media organization in the country, and then all of the health agencies that they're just hammering them. And they're saying basically that Health Canada made a mistake in terms of being lax as they are, so to speak, in whoever side you want to look at that. So at a time when Health Canada's back should be gotten here from the industry, is it right to assume that the industry has let Health Canada down?
Yes. very clearly. So, and you don't have to be a political insider or a board member to understand Health Canada's frustration. They put it in their letter to the industry that this amount of infractions are unacceptable, and that the fact is the TVPA has been around for years, and even the conversations I've had with different industry stakeholders was, this isn't child appealing, and the product had birds on it, which clearly are under the TVPA. That it's okay to have people on my products because no one's told me that I can't, which is clear under the TVPA. There are black and white rules here that have led to so many infractions. And we've heard from many saying, well, I only had 4 or 5 bottles, or I forgot about it in the bottom of my bin. And a lot of even honest mistakes like that, when you add it together, it has hurt the credibility of the industry. So we have talked to Health Canada about the fact that we are the legacy stakeholder for this industry and the gatekeeper for this industry. And we have had an incredible amount of infractions. And this is going to have to be addressed because this has hurt the industry's credibility a great deal. And while we focus on the instances where it's like, well, that shouldn't have been, and maybe they were wrong on this, or this was hard to interpret, we're here for that. And that's why we have regulatory lawyers to help assist us. But you also hear that, oh, that other shop doesn't care, and that other shop sells to minors, and so on and so forth. It's really hard for Health Canada to determine the good players in the industry and the quality retailers in the industry and those that are not. So it's really, the industry is going to have to come together, because if you look at the other channels, you will not see nearly that level of infractions at the convenience store level. And certainly that is a message that we heard loud and clear through the results that have come out here from Health Canada.
So do you think that, and I know some vapors and store owners do believe that this number was ginned up a little bit, that you've got 5 bottles and that's 5 instances, I guess, and so once that happens, that grows that number? Or is this something to be taken like deathly serious?
Well, I'll agree that if you look through the data, and we need to go through the data more, and it was just released yesterday, that we're going to find incidences that we're going to be able to work with Health Canada on, right? And to do some proper research and some proper articulation of that. But we have to take this seriously. We have to take this seriously as an industry, because if we look at the amount of infractions in the 80%, and they're going through the websites now, and if you look through the industry, you have people saying, I didn't remember that was there, I didn't know that was on there, all clearly against the TVPA. And it's not like the government just replaced the TVPA 3 months ago. So I think one of the biggest pieces of frustration that they have is they're saying, this has been around for years, and you're purposely breaking the law. And, if we go back, and Brent, you've heard this, the amount of pressure that was on Canada after COP7 to ban vaping in this country, and that Health Canada took the stance to make sure that this product was available for Canadians, and then brought through legislation and regulation, though not popular. And in today's environment, if they were to shut down vaping tomorrow, they would get support from the health advocacy groups, from Canadians at large, from provincial governments, and would be applauded by the media to 100% extent, even though it's completely in the opposite of smoke-free legislation and harm reduction, which is what government is there to protect. Instead, they have put us on notice that these are the concerns that they have in an environment that they've kept regulated, that they have allowed for us to continue to serve the hundreds of thousands of Canadians that have used and chose vaping as their harm reduction tool. So the onus is on us to come together as an industry. It's such an important message, because the key element to it is be the change that you want to see.
So why, excuse me though, I mean, this is 4 years covering this issue, and you can all have kumbaya unity moments. I mean, every interview I do with industry people is we've got to come together. No, that's not what has to happen. Every single vape shop has to follow the TVPA, or they must be shut down because they're hurting the rest of the industry.
Agree.
What is it come together stuff? This is follow the law. Because, I mean, how many vapors are there in Canada?
There's estimated over 900,000 vapors across the nation.
Right. Now, if there's no vaping industry for them around, say next year, what's going to happen to those, near million?
It's a clear public health risk. They're either going to buy it from the black market, or they're going to buy it offshore outside of a regulated environment, or go back to smoking.
Or go back to smoking. So
Yeah.
we're talking about a life and death issue here. For now, I know some people say it's not a lot, maybe 18% or something like that. But 180,000 Canadians' lives could be taken that were hopefully going to be saved if the vaping industry wasn't wiped out. So if it's that important, which it seems to be, and of course Health Canada would not have look. There's a whole entire government. It's not just Health Canada. We have to remember that Prime Minister Trudeau was behind this. It is his federal Liberal government that tabled the legislation in order to make it legal. It went through, obviously, rounds and rounds and rounds through Parliament, through the Senate. It got passed. It became law. So this thing it's rock solid to that extent. And what we're seeing here right now is a massive push externally from the regulator, externally from government, to put so much pressure on them to force them to back down on their decision-making process, to essentially say, I'll paraphrase this, but this is exactly what we're seeing in jurisdictions all across the world, certainly in the US, in Canada, to some extent in the UK. The pressure against vaping is designed to force the regulators to admit that they got the science wrong. And so, boy, if they're close on that, that's it. It's all ball games over there. And the industry can never, ever recover from that, because that indictment is one that it would take decades to overcome.
You're highlighting it correctly. And when you came and you were talking about the federal government and the Prime Minister was out and pushing back, saying that any decision around vaping is going to be evidence-based. The evidence here is that 80% of our retailers have active infractions. Over 80,000 products were confiscated.
That's evidence for you. That's evidence.
That is the fear. And I know that this message isn't going to be popular with everybody, but it's not about a popularity contest. It is simply about the facts that we have to address. And I'm not talking about coming together, kumbaya, that everyone likes each other, Brent. The fact is that if we don't see a dramatic reduction in the numbers that we're facing today, that this responsibility and onus is on every product vape shop across the country. Because if only a handful of retailers make the reductions, we won't see this fast enough. And in my estimation, we need to see a substantive reduction in the first quarter of 2020 to showcase to regulators that we are taking this industry seriously and that we are taking the evidence-based decision-making seriously. Because I have no sense that Health Canada doesn't believe in the harm reduction opportunity that vaping allows. You did not see that in the regulations that are coming out this week. You did not see any inference that vaping should be dialed back from the Canadian context. What they said was, youth uptake is important, the numbers are coming up, and that we have to address it. And they put rules that they've specified for the industry to follow. We have to follow those rules.
Yeah, it appears to me that that obviously when you look at what's happened in Nova Scotia and BC, the provincial government has said, hey, we're going to do this ourselves. And that certainly is an issue. It's a problem. I mean, in British Columbia, let's talk about them for a second, because they just put their details out this week too as well. While they're protecting flavors to an extent, I think that's great, of course. But only 10 milliliter bottles? I mean, that feels like a fight from just, years and years and years ago. And then the way that they framed the language in it is they seem to pretty much know that they want to stop all shot fills and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you can't sell non-nicotine vaping products for sure, right? So I mean, it clearly seems that they've closed every door on that.
And let me be clear on this. Every government across Canada has talked to other jurisdictions other than just trying to come up with things in a bubble. So they're well aware of what short fills are. Nova Scotia is, BC is, and that I think in this particular case, that's what the consultation period is there for. The BC government has been extremely open and measured to subject matter experts. I think it's definitely an issue we're going to be able to address. What I would suggest is this. The amount of knowledge about our industry at a government level is still next to zero. Right? They're still doing all their investigations across the country. I think Alberta is another example that's done an amazing job of reaching out to industry members to understand their business, how they serve those consumers, the amount of time that they spend with them. But I think more importantly is that we've just spent a ton of time telling the provincial governments and the federal government to trust us, and then the data comes out that 80% of the industry has a type of infraction, right? And we hear stories about, oh, I don't have the time to go through my websites, or I didn't think that I had to, without really going through the TVPA or getting legal advice in order to make sure that they're compliant, or come to organizations such as the CVA to ask these types of questions. Because again, it comes back to, it impacts us all at a federal level, at a provincial level, and at a municipal level.
This, so I'm just going to pop over here to the report from July to September. I've kind of zoomed in a little bit here. If I happen to end up showing any particular vape shop by name, my apologies. This is a public document, so of course anybody can see it, but it's not my intention. So I've got it zoomed in here. And I want to just take a run through here. Testimonials or endorsements as an infraction. There was a lot of those. It was one of the highlights of all of them. What is that? Explain how that manifests itself on a regular basis inside a vape shop.
Actually, and again, that's something, this is going to be kind of a lighter answer. One of the things that we've really asked Health Canada to do is to help us by reporting more than just what they've reported there, in order for us to dig in. Because the question has come that there's an expectation that organizations such as the CVA will actually help train on this. That is where the problem in the TVA happens for the for the CVA members and from the industry at large, where I understand is that it's very obscure right now of what that means. Right.
So, but there has, of course. I mean, right? You know, it is obscure. But has there been any explanation on what that might be?
Not yet. And that's something where I think that the industry can push us on, unless, Brent, you've heard something that I haven't.
No.
And I think that that's part of the challenge, right?
Because it seemed to be quite a bit. You know, a testimonial or endorsement inside a store for it to be, mentioned so often.
I know, and that's where digging into the details is going to be key, right? So where the frustration from the industry has been, and I sympathize and I understand the frustration. Could that have been, we had an industry meeting yesterday where it's like, why is a mouse pad an infraction? Now, did this mouse pad have, a half naked guy on it vaping and sitting on a beach, right? Or was it just a mouse pad where it had a mouse and a vape on it? You know what I mean? Like, that's where one of the things that we're asking from the industry, we're asking three specific things. One is to get us your examples. Right? Because when an inspector comes in, they do a series of things. One, they identify themselves, they show their ID and badge, and they're supposed to give you detailed paperwork on every infraction that you get. So we're asking the feds for that if they could dig into a little bit deeper for us, but they're not going to go through every infraction. They're going to do a high level. Really, it's important for us to understand is that we're going to need the industry to pull together, and again, I'll use this word together, so that we have the data, we have the infractions, so that we'll be able to take that through our regulatory lawyer as well and have a substantive conversation with Health Canada. Health Canada is not, and the inspectors are not there to interpret for the TVPA. They have made that clear, right?
So
go ahead.
So no guidance then?
No, there will not be a guidance document following. So it's up to us as an industry to come together and build our own guidance. So what I've seen today, even from yesterday's industry meeting, Brent, is a bunch of conversation through Facebook of sharing best practices and sharing, hey, this was infraction for me, and here's why. This was an infraction for me. Here's why. Here's some questions. I've got a ton of phone calls before this interview. I'm going through my website today. Daryl, what do you think? The issue with that is, in terms of the public perception, the media perception, and the perception of government, is that it shouldn't happen today. This should have been at this height a year ago.
Should have
a year
been
and a half ago.
May 2018.
May 2018.
Should have been handled by then, or within 3 to 6 months from then. That's still in 2018.
And so that's the federal government's frustration with the industry. So and let me be clear, our credibility as it relates to these infractions has been hurt. So if you look at the other types of products like the closed pod systems, they're not going to be party to these types of infractions. And that business model is very different from the open system business model. So that they're being seen as two things, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, this was 1,000 specialty vape stores specifically called out specialty vape. That's it. Specialty vape, 80% of them had infractions. The 80,000 comes from the 80% of the specialty vape stores. No C stores involved at all in this particular set of data. And
I did see a few on there, Brent, because there are some C stores that would carry open systems and so on and so forth that would be expected. But what I would suggest to you is that there is an opportunity to really change this story.
Okay, but before we go there, though, let's stick on the narrative thing here. Isn't part of the danger here is that the side of the industry that's more orientated towards C stores and pod systems, so the more big vape kind of side, doesn't this open up vape shops and open tank systems to the accusation that you always say that C stores can't be trusted to sell these products? Only we can be trusted to sell these products because we're age verified, we're adult only, and so forth. But yet all of these, all of these problems.
So what I would suggest to you is that, and what I've been impressed about from the regulators from coast to coast, is that they're understanding that these are not like things. So I'll give you a perfect example. These are the types of products under the TVPA that we have to address. That's something we have to address. They understand quite clearly that when it comes to education, store certification, and detailing adults, and a superior ID verification platform, that the product vape shops have a ton of value. Great. So in Alberta, and Brent, this is something that certainly I would like to share, and one of my key learnings is in Alberta, the government there told us that there was over 15,000 fake IDs floating around the province, and that you can get them from China from anywhere between $20 to $50 at the high end. And these fake IDs are perfect, right down to the barcode on the back. So I'm buying one with a picture of my daughter, my daughter's name, a picture of me, and I'm going to put myself at 110 years old, just to show when it comes to IDing, the specialty product vape shops are going to be able to put in the investments and the technology to make sure that we ensure that youth and underage do not get access to these products. So we, again, talking about the opportunity, is that when it comes to the education around nicotine concentrations, that's another place where government sees the product vape shop as having a tremendous amount of value, because they have the education, the experience, and the knowledge to be able to detail someone's nicotine requirement, to be able to, especially for a heavy smoker, to allow for their full transition to take full advantage of harm reduction, is to go through that nicotine education and profiling for that consumer. These things are core elements. So it's being well accepted.
So Daryl, there's been an assault on vaping in the media in Canada to an extent that's never been seen before, led by our national broadcaster to a certain extent, but really, just to blame it all on the CBC doesn't do justice to the PR nightmare that has been unleashed on this industry. Now, you've done a ton, and your folks at CVA have done a ton of media interviews. How welcoming are the national media and Ontario media, for instance, how welcoming are they to the argument about harm reduction? I'm assuming you get asked about it a lot.
Almost zero. So, and for those who have heard me speak, I bring up harm reduction every time. But essentially, youth uptake has taken over such a large portion of the argument that the hundreds of thousands of vapors haven't even been considered in any of these arguments, and that the facts in terms of the data specifically coming out of UK are almost completely ignored. The more successful argument that I found in the media is the concept that the black market could take over this product range as opposed to the harm reduction, which means that we still have a lot of work to do. That's where regulations are going to help, right? But it's with regulations comes responsibility, and we have to be responsible in order to do our measure best to be compliant at all times to regulation. So all the work that we've done over September, since September to December, will be largely attacked based on these two numbers alone.
Yes, and that is the fear. Mindful of our time, because we know that we've got a hard stop, so I've got you for a little bit more here. Let me ask you this. If you could give if Health Canada is listening, which I hope they are, I've sent them notes to their media team about our broadcast today, and I would hope that they're taking the time to take a look at what you're saying and the RegWatch message overall, to the extent that we have one. What would you like Health Canada to know about what the industry is planning on doing to meet these challenges?
That the industry is taking it very, very seriously.
Are they? Are they?
They are. And that when it comes to bodies such as the CVA, we have done another full, complete review of the TVPA through a regulatory lawyer to add tools and resources to make sure that people know how to be compliant, and that a pathway to ask broader questions is always going to be key to help get rid of some of the ambiguity, because some of the problems that we had is that from coast to coast, the inspectors aren't exactly the same on their interpretation of the TVPA. So they will make one decision in BC, which completely is different than a decision that they'll make in Nova Scotia. And the inspectors have been phenomenal. Like they're very courteous. They try to be as helpful as where they can. It's not adversarial at all between the vape shops and the inspectors. The training in order to get this right is not only important for the product vape shops and for their compliance, but I think it's in the best spirit of great policy and public policy that has been done well. The biggest hit from the media and the CBC is that there is no policy for vaping, that there is no regulation for vaping. And that is completely incorrect. We think that the government of Canada has taken great strides through the TVPA. We are fully supportive of things like GMP standards, which we know we've been talking to Health Canada on, because if you lose this industry to and adult product vape shops specifically, that your only way to regulate adult-only access disappears. And it's an important role that product vape shops play in this country, because beyond IDing and beyond the youth uptake issue, which we know will be addressed here, is that the harm reduction is best served by those who have the knowledge and can help transition, because it's not just about vaping because it feels like you're smoking. It's about all of the education, community support that goes into what addiction services and professionals are all about. And we have so many professionals at our product vape shops that can really help adult smokers reduce their harm by at least 95% and transition off of combustible tobacco.
And I mean, that's been the message, for years and years and years. It just seems that it has been so undermined by these infractions, what seems to be a lax, attitude when it comes to following the TVPA. And I'm certain of course, that Health Canada doesn't have the resources, and there won't be some new police force. Not that you'd want one, but there definitely won't be one. So in the end, I would imagine that, if the new year rolls around, obviously I think these new rules and restrictions are going to get posted in the Gazette, I think tomorrow. After that, you have 30 days for public input. And then following that, really by the third week of January, I don't know if Health Canada is going to do much more than just start writing fines.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think differentiating between those who follow the law and those who follow the regulations and those who don't need to be held accountable. We've seen that in the numbers.
Yeah, for sure. So let me just walk through, because obviously how things are in such a terrible shape here when it comes to I don't even want to call it public relations. This is this is a fallacious assault on vaping worldwide, and obviously North America really strongly here. Ottawa moves to ban vaping advertisements to prevent youth exposure, and this is City News and this is Canadian Press. So this is the Canadian Newswire, and their story on this yesterday. Health Canada is proposing the ban. The minister put forward the rules. Announced vaping packages, nicotine, and quote, the new measures announced today will help, but there is more to do. Haidu said in a statement, we are working on further steps to protect youth, and our message remains clear. Vaping comes with serious risks. And these are changes in language at a time when we were hoping in the fall to be getting access to harm risk statements that actually communicated to adult Canadians that vaping is less harmful than smoking. All of these different things that had been discussed for some time did not get put out. And now we're in the position where it is serious health risks. We're going to have health risks warnings instead of warning, instead of statements that could be used in marketing and so forth. Let me get back to this here. Again, it hits the data on the teens uptick, and we can go over that over and over and over again. But what's striking here is that immediately this comment right here, Rob Cunningham, senior policy analyst at the Canadian Cancer Society, praised the government's plan as a strong start, but said, quote, comprehensive action, close quote, is still needed, such as restricting flavors and implementing a tax. Now, for our viewers that may happen to look, the fact of the matter is that I identify the enemy. I can identify both sides of issues. I'm not saying that Cancer Society particularly is doing anything, nefarious, but they are an enemy of vaping. There's no doubt. That's just as simple as that. And so here we have a perfect example of you get an inch. It's not even the vaping industry that gave the inch, even though in the devil's bargain, the vaping industry has been trying to find, and as CVA has done, given ground on certain issues and so forth. But then here you have Rob Cunningham, who basically leaves the health advocacy push effort in Canada on this issue. He said, oh yeah, all this is great. Totally awesome. But wait, we still have to kill the industry. Ban flavors and taxes.
Listen, and I think that, and I've been clear on this, Rob Cunningham is completely wrong on this flavoring issue. We've been crossed in different interviews before from coast to coast. It's the data is clear when it comes to flavors, and the fact that it's had next to no impact on youth uptake. Quite frankly, the flavor profiles used by most youth are so limited. It doesn't even qualify as a full line that you would find for flavors that are used by adults.
Right.
Frankly, it's just an easy line for Rob to throw out, and he doesn't support it.
Because I want to make sure you get in the last couple of words here before your heart stops. So there's one more thing on this I wanted to make sure that you got. And this is a crazy bit. This is almost every single Canadian press story over the last 2 months, and definitely the last month, which is just grating, does this. So it gets to the bottom, finally done. Oh no, did they cut it? Yeah, right here. So right at the very, very end, Cunningham said the issue has taken on new urgency due to mounting concern about the links between vaping and respiratory disease. And then CP writes, in the United States, 47 deaths have been attributed to vaping and 2,000 cases of severe lung disease have been reported. The 13 cases of vaping-associated lung illness has been reported in Canada, blah. So what we have here, of course, no nuance. No, you don't even need nuance. CDC has completely, fully mea culpa. In the last week to 2 weeks, they are fully. And how does this, Canadian press get away with this? How could Rob Cunningham sleep at night when he's not correcting members of the national media and the wire services on this very important issue?
Well, in terms of Rob Cunningham, the one thing is, and I've tried to contact Rob Cunningham, is I challenge him to sit down and have a meeting with us. Our proposals outside of how we deal with flavors are almost completely aligned. And it's ridiculous that we can't have a conversation what's the best interest of harm reduction and what's the best interest to drive down combustible smoking rates. So I'll say it again. I believe that the onus is on the Canadian Cancer Society to answer our calls to meet with them. On the other side, as it relates to the CDC and the media, the one piece of good news that I'll give vapers and vaping owners across this country is this. Many of the regulators that I talk to, specifically on policy, are not following these media stories the way that we believe they are. They absolutely understand the release on the CDC, and they took it seriously. That's why you're seeing, even in this particular case, that the problem is defined in Canada. For the media, is they use the lung illnesses to try to drive hysteria so that people will watch it. But the challenge in Canada continues to be youth uptake. The industry will stand to ensure that new users aren't attracted to this product, and that we keep it available in environments for adult smokers. That being said, the media, and even if you look at the egregious stories done by the CBC, and you know that I did a 45-minute interview with them, and they took 7 seconds or 8 seconds of me to fit their narrative, as opposed to the many things that we talked about with harm reduction and real answers to address youth uptake. All of that was cut, right? But so were their series, and now CBC has taken it off of their Facebook and on different social medias in terms of their Vape Fail series, because people were calling into credibility when you have the industry ready to talk to you, and instead you talk to a high school student for 45 minutes, and you give the industry that has prescriptive answers to deal with adult access 7 to 9 seconds.
Now that might be an update. Actually, I didn't know that CBC has been yanking down the stories.
They have.
Ooh. Oh, that's good.
Yes. Yeah. So I think that, and even in an interview where I did this week, the interviewer, who was quite hard on us with studies, halfway through the interview, is like, "Oh, by the way, I'm biased against this. I don't think it should be available for anybody."
The CBC reporter, sorry.
No, this was at News 1010, but it goes to show that we'll get through this with regulators if we present the right behaviors and take these issues seriously as presented by Health Canada. Then we can turn our attention to the media, and we can turn our attention to educating Canadians, because ultimately the long ball fight is going to be recapturing that harm reduction message, so that Canadian smokers know that, and we're seen and viewed as a positive part of Canadian society. But if I go back to the conversations we've had with government, is that the mass media stories of all the death in the United States, they're by that now, right? They're getting it, and they're watching the studies and the FDA and the CDC, and even in our own reporting, how lung incidents will be reported, and then you don't hear about it ever again. right? And these are what I'm hearing from decision makers and lawmakers. So going into the Christmas break, if I could give everyone one Christmas present, it would be that it's not as much gloom and doom as we see, but we know that the businesses are under a ton of amount of pressure. We're reporting of sales down 50, 60, 70%. Shops are starting to close, but it's the media that has done the vast majority of that damage. Other than outside of a couple of provinces where we know we have challenges, and we're asking those provinces to meet with us and have a substantive conversation, because specifically in Nova Scotia, where not only will a flavor ban not address youth uptake, but its negative consequences are remarkable. And that, to me, is the definition of a failed policy.
So it seems to me, then, and you can tell me whether or not this is fair, is that really you're asking industry to follow the regulations, because that is the key thing, that if you don't, then there's really nothing that you can hang your hat on. These are the rules and regulations that make vaping legal in Canada. And if you don't follow the rules and regulations that make vaping legal in Canada, it may not be legal in Canada for much longer.
Well, and distribution will be driven by those who don't understand the best way to detail a consumer. So that when you're making decisions in terms of your business, not only does it impact you, not only does it impact your customer, but it impacts the industry as a whole, and it really impacts our ability to be effective with government relations in order to make sure that lawmakers have the most up-to-date information and that we're credible. And it also really hurts us in the eyes of the media about our messaging that we're harm reduction. We have to get back to that. And even the behaviors before, and we talked about this before, Brent, where using naming conventions that were, very much appealing to all demographics. We knew that if something went wrong, that those were going to come back to bite us in the ass. They did. And we're still dealing with public perception of things that have been gone for 3 years ago, and we're still in that realm. And now with these new data sets, it's going to give new arguments to why we're not being a responsible industry.
And certainly, I can tell you, I meet people all the time, regular Canadians, that have no idea that vaping is legal in Canada. So, and you let them know, it's been legal now for some time, and they're like, they just have no idea. They think it's an illegal product that's on the market. So, I know you have to go. So, last word to you, and then I'll close her off.
Well, first, Brent, thank you for covering the issue. I really appreciate it. And my last comment is this. The industry needs to work together. We are all in this together. These infractions are representative of so many who are, either not part of advocacy or part of advocacy. That time is come and gone. What's critical here is that we are sharing best practices and information together to make sure that we're compliant under regulation is what's going to change the national narrative from a media perspective, or one way or the other. Either we do it and it's going to help our narrative, like we half the infractions in the first quarter of 2020, or there's going to be more infractions that's going to hurt us more. If we don't come together and work together, it doesn't matter if certain segment does it, we all have to do it, or we have to differentiate ourselves from those who don't. Otherwise, we're all at risk.
Well, fair enough. And well, thank you so much for coming on, Daryl. And just hang tight if you can here, and I'll catch you before we're off. So that's it for this edition of RegWatch, my friends. And considering that is going to be our last one before Christmas, I want to actually wish everybody a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and a Happy New Year. Though we do have a couple of taped episodes that will come out, not sure when, as soon as I get a chance to edit them. That will be post-turkey, though, for sure. So that's it for this edition of RegWatch. Before you head off, please go to support.regulatorwatch.com, take a look around, dig into your wallet, find a few dollars, toss them our way. You'll be happy you did, and so will we. We'll also be very thankful to you. And while online, don't forget to like us on Facebook and to follow us on Twitter. For regulatorwatch.com, I'm Brent Stafford.